Hello and welcome back to our conversation about peaceful communication, how to communicate with one another with less violence, how to spread peace in our own hearts and our own lives and our own families and communities. Last time we talked about feelings and needs in a kind of introductory way, and I thought it might make sense for us this time to talk a little bit about violence, because if we're about reducing levels of violence, it might be helpful for us to really understand a technical definition of what violence is. So what do you think about when you think about violence? Maybe you think about physical violence or terrorism, war, those kind of things. Certainly the shootings that have been going on in our country, there are all sorts of types of violence. But of course, violence isn't just physical. It can also be online. It can be psychological. It can be spiritual. Any form of oppression is a form of violence. How do we describe all of this sort of stuff with a simple definition of violence? Well, one thing Marshall Rosenberg talks about is that violence is any time I get my needs met without worrying about your needs. So anytime I want to grab mine without worrying about you getting yours, violence is present. And let's think through some examples of that in an interpersonal way. And perhaps later on we can talk about the bigger picture things like systemic violence and how it manifests itself hiding in the corners of structures of societies and organizations. So just some clarification about violence in an interpersonal sort of a way and an internal way, because we can use violence on ourselves too, which we'll talk about. So violence is anytime one person or one group's needs are getting met without reference to the others. So if I want to get my needs met and I'm not thinking about your needs, that is a signal that violence is present. And of course, violence can be present at various levels. As we said last time, I don't think we can eliminate violence from this world, but we can certainly reduce the amount of violence that we participate in, and we can reduce the levels of violence in all of our interactions. So if I go into a conversation with you, whether it's a friendly conversation or a conflicted conversation, if as I enter into that conflict or conversation, or even if in the middle of it I sort of realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm feeling threatened, or I'm feeling on my heels, or I'm feeling I need to defend something, we can take a deep breath and say, am I trying to get my needs met without somebody else's needs getting met? Or the other way around, perhaps you're in a conversation or a relationship and you feel the conflict, but you're thinking, gosh, I feel like my needs don't matter in this conversation. My needs don't matter in this relationship. Nonviolent communication is about making sure we can express our needs and our feelings in ways that don't escalate or ratchet up the violence. So how do we know violence is present? Well, anytime anybody is feeling like they've got to give up or give in, anytime someone feels like they've got to go along to get along, that's a sign that violence is present in the relationship or in the conversation. So you've probably had those moments where you're like, oh yeah, it's probably easier if I just go along with this, even though I don't like it and I don't feel like it's good, I'll just kind of go along with it. That's a sign that your needs are not being heard and that somebody else is trying to get you to do what they want. Another way to think about violence is someone's using leverage on you. They're trying to get you to do what they want you to do, but they're not worried about what you want or what you need. And thus, any time in an interpersonal relationship where punishment is being used, violence is present. So if there's a threat that if you don't do this, then I'm going to do something to you, that is an example of violence where I'm using leverage, the kind of either actual threat or implied threat. I'm using my leverage to get you to do what I want without worrying about your needs. So anytime punishment is present, that's a sign that violence is present. And violence is often a shortcut, we think. It's a shortcut to get what we want. So think about obvious forms of punishment like spanking in parenting or something like that. Those forms of punishment are obvious signs of violence being used. But think also about things like detention in the school system or just kind of, if you don't, then I will, which can happen in subtle ways in family dynamics, in marriages, etc. This kind of implied, unless you do what I want, you're not going to get something you want. That kind of leverage is a sign that violence is present. Marshall Rosenberg also says that violence is present anytime a reward is on offer. And this one, I have to say, I had to wrestle with for a long time, and it probably is something that you might want to wrestle with too. Anytime a reward is necessary to get somebody to do something, that's a sign of violence. So if you think about, say, a school classroom where the teacher is trying to get the students to behave, the teacher, again, using violence as a shortcut to get what she wants, the teacher might say, well, if you all don't sit down, there's going to be a punishment, like you're not going to go to recess, or we're going to not read the story later, or you're not going to get a pizza party, or whatever. Anytime that there is a punishment, unless you do what I want, that's a sign that the person is trying to use their authority to force someone else to do what they want, right? And so that's that. My needs for a quiet classroom are going to be more important than your needs for whatever it is. So I don't care about your needs right now. I want my classroom quiet. That's the sign that there's violence in the system. Rewards work in a similar way. If you all are quiet, I'll give you this extra thing, right? Notice that the person in authority, in this case the teacher, is trying to use a shortcut to get them to do what the teacher wants them to do without worrying about their needs being met, right? So I'm going to dangle this reward out here and say, hey, I'll give you this shiny thing if you do what I want. That's violence in the sense that the teacher is not paying attention to the needs of the students at all. And here I have to sort of say, notice how prevalent violence is in our society and in our culture, and often, in fact, we don't think that punishment or reward in a setting like a classroom are actually violent. We say, no, that's just classroom management. That's just how you take care of things and make sure that you have an orderly classroom. Part of what we're going to be talking about in nonviolent communication, in peaceful communication, is how can that teacher get her need for an orderly classroom met while caring for the needs of the students, instead of doing the shortcut sort of a route. And this helps with parenting too, like trying to get your kids to go to bed. It can be so frustrating. And the temptation is, well, if you don't go to bed, then I'm not going to read you a story, right? So I'm going to use this punishment I'm going to take something away from you if you don't do what I want, right? Or we're going to create a star chart, and every night you do it, I'm going to give you a star, and if you do it all right, then we're going to go to ice cream on Friday night or something like that, right? So I could use punishment or reward, but the important thing Marshall Rosenberg is trying to get us to understand is that if I resort to the star chart reward system, or if I resort to the punishment thing, like I'm going to yell at you and get angry at you and make you feel bad or whatever, either of those choices on behalf of me as the parent is me trying to get my need for bedtime met without paying attention to my child's need. And yes, nonviolent communication is about getting everybody's need met without resorting to kind of power over dynamics, right? So sometimes we as parents are tempted to say, well, I'm in charge here and you have to do what I want. That's violence. Sometimes in the workplace, I'm the boss, you have to do what I want. That's violence, right? So part of what Rosenberg is trying to help us see by using this definition of violence as any time somebody gets what they want or need without reference to what the other people need, that's violence, is to help us see how prevalent violence is in our world and in our society, and how we often use violence without even thinking about it. We have to notice the prevalence of violence and become more aware of it so we can make other choices. So that even if I'm tired at the end of the day and my child is like delaying the bedtime routine, I have a choice. Instead of just defaulting to, I'm angry and I'm frustrated, so I'm going to make my child do what I want them to do, instead, maybe I can take a deep breath and go, what are my child's needs here? And how can we find a solution that meets my needs and my child's needs. What peaceful communication is about is trying to get both parties in the conflict to become aware of one another's needs. So for example, if I'm the parent trying to get my kid to bed, I want to help my child understand what I need in terms of getting to bed. And in order to do that, I need to understand my child's needs as well. It takes a little bit of a shift in a change of thought and a change of approach, but when two people who are in conflict start to see one another's needs, they naturally start working together to meet both sets of needs. As these sessions unfold, we're going to learn how this all works, and I'm going to teach you how to do it.